Legend of Total War here, and today we're doing a Greenskin Legendary Lord power comparison video. So I'll be comparing each of the Greenskin Legendary Lords and giving them a ranking out of 10. There's 3 main factors that I use to judge each of these Legendary Lords, so I'll just briefly go over what those criteria are, and then we'll go into the comparisons. So the first criteria that I judge them on, and each 3 criteria is weighted exactly the same. The first one is basically how much damage that they personally can do in battle, whether that be in melee or with magic. The more damage they can dish out in general, the higher their score. The next one is how good of a battle commander they are. So the more buffs that they provide to better units, the higher their score. If they provide good buffs to crap units, they don't get a very high score for that. And then the third one is the faction buffs. So the more bonuses they provide passively to the entire faction, just for existing, the higher their score. So things like global bonuses to public order, global bonuses to tax income, or whatever like that, that all adds up to their rating for the faction-wide buffs. Now, one thing I'm not taking into consideration is the actual faction buff. So that being said, with like Grom as an example, his Grom's Cauldron, that's not necessarily tied to Grom the Paunch. Now, this is probably going to be something that people will contest a bit, because it is a big part of Grom's campaign, you know, the Grom's Cauldron. But the thing to consider is that if you're playing as Grimgor and you confederate Grom the Paunch, you don't get Grom's Cauldron. But if you're playing as Broken Axe and you confederate Grimgor, Grimgor can make use of Grom's Cauldron. So it really is a Broken Axe mechanic, not necessarily a Grom the Paunch mechanic. So each of these Greenskin Legendary Lords will be judged as if it were possible, you know, through a mod or whatever, if you had confederated them into, say, Broken Nose or the Red Eye Tribe or something like that. Something that just has no faction-wide mechanics like that. But if you want to, you know, apply a bonus to Grom the Paunch because of his overpowered mechanic, then that's totally fine. But I don't feel like in this particular type of comparison that it's a very fair judgment, because really only one Greenskin Legendary Lord gets it, and it's only tied to the faction, not the actual Legendary Lord themselves. Alright, another thing that I want to do in this video here is I'm not going to do things in ascending or descending order, because I think the number 5 and number 1 picks could be a bit controversial. So what we're going to do is we're going to do this in order of 4, 3, 2, 5, 1. Okay? So that's the order we're going to do it in. So first one I'm going to talk about is the number 4 pick. So let's get into that one. Coming in at number 4 is Scarce Nick. Now, the thing about Scarce Nick is, prior to the Greenskin patch, I probably would have rated him to be the best Greenskin Legendary Lord, because all the other ones were pretty much trash. But with the Greenskin update, Scarce Nick just didn't really receive any major significant buffs. You get a few really minor buffs here and there that just didn't have much of an impact. So looking at him, let's evaluate the 3 criteria. So the first one is battle skill. I'm rating him 8 out of 10. He is a pretty good fighter. He can take on most things in the game. He is anti-large. He is pretty good at fighting, but he doesn't have any magic. And he doesn't have a mount. Goblet doesn't count as a mount, he's just like a pet that comes with it. He's a decent amount of health, but overall he's just a middling sort of fighter, and he doesn't get a whole lot better throughout the campaign. So his early game potential is quite high, but late game he just doesn't really get a whole lot better. So 8 out of 10 is the score I'm giving him. As for the second criteria, Battle Commander, I'm giving him a 7 out of 10. The thing about Scarce Nick is that he does provide some pretty decent buffs to his army, but only really at the Goblin and Squig level, which there are no really high tier Goblin and Squig units, so you'll only be at a benefit at the beginning of the campaign, and later on in the campaign, Scarce Nick's army is really not that much different from any other generic Greenskin Legendary Lord, with the exception of Proper Tough. This here is where he's getting most of his points, and I'm going to rank this as a battle commander, not as a faction-wide buff, because it's only for him. That extra plus 15 campaign movement range is really good. That allows him to get out of enemies' ways or catch up to enemies that are, you know, running away from him quite a lot. So he's really good at just being on the campaign map and actually getting into engagements that you want him to. Whereas the other Greenskin Legendary Lords don't have anywhere near as much campaign movement range as Scarce Nick. But if we have a look at all the ways that Scarce Nick actually buffs units, we've got, bonuses to squigs, bonuses to goblins and night goblins, and that's okay, and it's good in the early game, but it's just not going to help in the late game. And then finally, the faction-wide buffs, I'm giving him an 8 out of 10. And that's primarily and solely because of Scarce Nick's Prodder. So that provides +3 obedience to all provinces, which used to be absolutely essential for the Greenskins because they had no technologies and no faction-wide buffs other than this to increase their public order. So you had to build the big boss hut or whatever in every single province, and sometimes had to build multiple of them on legendary difficulty just to maintain obedience. It used to be absolutely essential to get that +3. But since the Greenskin update, you've now got the WA mechanic, which gives you up to 5. There's a technology, well, a big thinking, that'll give you another 3. So that's already up to 8. And adding on top of that, don't get me wrong, that +3 is really good, but it's just not as essential as it used to be. So overall, he's got an 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10, and 8 out of 10. So that means his overall rating is 7.666 out of 10. And he's a good Legendary Lord, but just not as good as he used to be. He used to be absolutely essential. Now, you don't really need him. Some of the other Greenskin Legendary Lords have just come up ahead on him. So it really just is a case of he just got left behind. Coming in at number 3 is Aresg the Slaughterer. Now, prior to the Greenskin update, I would have rated Aresg as one of the worst Greenskin Legendary Lords. There was just nothing special about him. But with the patch, he got those special bonuses that make him quite unique. Because he does have one of the most unique items in the Warhammer world. He has the Crown of Sorcery, and that wasn't really well reflected previously, but it is now. So, in terms of battle skill, I'm actually going to give Aresg the Slaughterer a 10 out of 10 rating. Now, he's not the best melee combatant in the game, and neither is he the best spellcaster, but he is kind of the best hybrid Legendary Lord in the game. He's like, there is no spellcaster in the game that's as good at melee as Aresg, and there's no melee Lord in the game that's as good a spellcaster as Aresg. So, he's not the best at either, but he's good at both, which boosts his score by a lot, because you can make use of that in just about every battle scenario. So I'll go through some of his skills to explain exactly how that works. So for one thing, he's the only Greenskin Legendary Lord that gets a flying mount. He gets a Wyvern, which is a pretty good mount. It's not as good as a Griffin, not as good as a Dragon, but Greenskins don't get those anyway. And another thing is that he gets Regeneration and the bound spell Wind of Death, which he can cast for free every battle. And that's just one free non-overcasted Wind of Death, which can still inflict a lot of damage, especially if they've got a lot of infantry units. And the fact that that doesn't consume Winds of Magic is really good, because Greenskins tend to not have huge pools of magic. So that's just a free spell every single battle, and that's going to inflict a lot of damage, as long as you actually hit something with it. Then another thing, he's got the Crown of Sorcery, which gives him another 3 spells of Gaze of Nagash. Not a great spell, but on lower unit scales, it'll do a lot of damage. And on ultra unit scale, it'll still do some damage, but at the end of the day, it's free. So he's got a fair bit of equipment as well. He's one of the few Greenskin Legendary Lords that actually have 3 pieces of equipment. And these 3 pieces of equipment are actually really good. Now, the weird thing about them, though, is that these equipment actually apply to his battle skill and also his battle commander skill. Okay, because these are some good bonuses, but because of the bonuses that provide to nearby allies, a lot of that bonus will be applied to battle commander. So moving on to that point, a little bit of a segue, is that he is a 7 out of 10 battle commander. So he's actually not the best battle commander, right? Because he buffs fairly basic units. He buffs orcs, not black orcs, and biggin units. And he buffs them by a fair amount, but these are not units you're going to want to have in the late game, so eventually, even with the buffs, you're probably not really going to want biggins over black orcs, or even Arachnaroks and just other higher tier units. They just sort of get a little bit obsolete by the end of the campaign, even with the buffs. So it just it's useful at the middle of the campaign, but then becomes less useful as the campaign goes on. So I can't really give him top marks for that. But because of his hard armor and Slagger slashes, even if he doesn't have those units, he can still buff other units as long as he's nearby them. So if you've got a blob of a Ragnarok spiders or giants, God forbid, you can still give them some really significant buffs with just by being close by them. So that is a significant buff, but I'm only going to give him a 7 out of 10. Now, in terms of faction buffs, I'm going to give Aresg a 7 out of 10 because he doesn't provide much. What he does provide is an extra hero capacity for shamans and hero recruit rank +4 for shamans. So as for faction-wide buffs, I'm going to give that a 7 out of 10 because shamans are super important and you should have at least one in every single one of your army, and being able to recruit 4 extra levels on each of your shamans will really help towards getting them towards Foot of Gore or Curse of the Bad Moon or whatever it is you actually want to get in on your shamans. You know, because the early game shamans, you know, when you're just using Gaze of Mork or Vindictive Glare, those aren't exactly amazing spells, and when you're recruiting a new shaman, you really just want to get past that very quickly, and Aresg can really help you do that. So that is a very important skill. So overall, I'm giving Aresg an 8 out of 10, which is a solid rating. He is a fantastic battle combatant, but he's just not the best commander in the game. Coming in at number 2 is Grom the Paunch.
Who's your friend?
This one's going to require a bit of an explanation because I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to put him at number 1, and I'll explain exactly why he doesn't deserve that spot. So, it largely comes down to Grom's Cauldron, and why I'm not applying that to Grom is because it is actually a faction mechanic. It's applied to Broken Axe, it's not applied to Grom. If you're playing as Grimgore and you confederate Grom the Paunch, you get Grom the Paunch, but you don't get Grom's Cauldron. In a hypothetical scenario, if you were able to revive the Broken Axe after confederating Grom, which is possible to do with other factions in the game. I don't think it's actually possible to revive Grom after he's gone in this, currently at least. But yeah, if you were able to do that, Broken Axe would still actually have access to Grom's Cauldron. Like if you went up against goblins in the Broken Axe, even after Grom has left that faction, they would still possibly have explosive shot and whatever. The AI does actually make use of Grom's Cauldron. An example of something of this that can actually happen in the game is, we'll use Nagaryth as an example. So Nagaryth is able to ambush attack like Skaven and Beastmen, and they're able to recruit with a ritual, the Hand of the Shadow Crown Assassin. But if you as Attain confederate a Lithanar, you don't get those abilities. But if you cause a revolt at Tor Anlek after confederating a Lithanar, you can revive Nagaryth. And despite a Lithanar not being in Nagaryth, Nagaryth will still be able to ambush attack and recruit Hand of the Shadow Crown, because those faction-wide abilities apply to the faction, not the Legendary Lord, which is why this is not taken into consideration. If we did start taking these into consideration, a lot of the faction DLC lords are going to be really wonkily judged, like Ikit Claw and Deathmaster Snitch. It's just going to have very wonky ratings if we're going to do other races, Legendary Lords, down the path, which I would like to do. Anyway, let's now talk about what is good and bad about Grom. So in terms of a battle combatant, Grom is a 10 out of 10 Legendary Lord. He's kind of weird in a way because he's unique in that he's got one special ability that isn't well known. Grom is actually able to keep swinging while trying to get out of combat. He is perhaps the only Legendary Lord in the game that does this. You know, if you're playing as Kolek Suneater as an example, and you are trying to get him out of combat, he's not going to keep swinging while trying to get out. He's just going to try and push everyone out of the way. He's not going to be doing damage to them. But Grom, even while you're trying to get him out of, say, a melee blob, Grom will keep swinging. Now, if you use that correctly, you can tie up a lot of infantry and inflict damage to them while they're trying to chase you. It's actually kind of ridiculous how many kills Grom can get doing this. Of course, he also gets a passive regen, which is really useful. He's got a huge amount of resistances, and he's got the Roll 'em Over, which causes causes rattled effect, which is a serious debuff to enemy combatants. He's got the Axe of Grom, which provides a decent buff, and the Lucky Banner, which that'll probably apply to his Battle Commander ability because it applies to the entire army. But there are some significant buffs just in his skill tree here that will make Grom quite a significant tank and able to inflict hundreds of kills in any battle. In my multiple campaigns that I've played as Grom, he's inflicted thousands of kills across the campaign, and he can survive a hell of a lot of punishing, so that makes him a really good battle combatant. So the next thing I want to judge him on is the Commander skill. So I'm going to give him an 8 out of 10 for Battle Commander, because he boosts goblins by an absurd degree. Like, probably more than any other lord in the game in terms of, like, just boosting a certain unit. But the problem is that there are no high tier goblins. There's no goblins at, like, tier 5. So a lot of these units in the late campaign aren't really going to be viable, even with those bonuses. But you will be able to use goblins right up until then. So you can delay getting him a very expensive army of Arachnaroks and whatnot. And just focus on a goblin army, because he provides physical resistance, extra leadership, extra melee attack, just loads and loads of bonuses to goblins. Not taking into consideration, of course, the red skill tree, because that's generic across all factions. I'm talking about just unique stuff that he provides to his goblins. So he does provide a ton to that. And in addition to that, and I think he's got the best one of this, Grom's War, being able to restore up to 432 hit points to every combatant on the battlefield, every ally combatant, that is a big bonus. That allows his War to keep on fighting a lot more than, say, a lot of the other Greenskin Legendary Lords that just provide like a melee attack bonus. And this applies to Grom, so if you confederate him, you'll still get access to this when he's the commander. So he's getting an 8 out of 10 as a battle commander. And as for faction buffs, I'm going to give him a 7 out of 10. He doesn't provide a lot, but the buffs he provides are pretty good. Using the Axe of Grom, you get a +5 growth to all provinces. And through Culinary Curmudgeon, he gets +15 growth to all provinces. That's all he provides globally. And that's not bad. It's not quite as good as Scarce Nick's with +3 public order. But it's essentially like building one of these in every single province you own. And with the Greenskins, well, with any race, growth is important because you really want to get to tier 5 as quickly as possible. And Grom can help a great deal in doing that. So 7 out of 10 for that. So overall, Grom is going to get an 8.3 out of 10, making him the second best Greenskin Legendary Lord, in my opinion. But Broken Axe, definitely the strongest Greenskin faction. Want to make that clear. Alright, with that being said, let's now go on to number 5, the worst Greenskin Legendary Lord. So, prepare yourself, here comes number 5. Coming in at number 5 is unfortunately Grimgore Ironhide. That's right, the guy who is the Greenskin leader, is supposed to be the best, at least he keeps telling us, he's actually the worst. So why is it? Why is the guy who's propped up to be like this overpowered monster, why is he actually the worst Greenskin Legendary Lord in this game? And it really just comes down to one thing, and that is that he only has one thing on his mind. Every other Greenskin Lord in the game is able to be versatile. Grimgore is really rigid. He just does one thing, and he does it really well. He goes into fight and he kills shit. That's all he can do. Now, that is not enough to give him a 10 out of 10 rating on any of the categories, especially when he falls behind so massively in some of them. So in terms of his battle skill, I'm going to give him 9 out of 10, which means he's not even as good as Aresg or Grom, or the guy who's coming in at number 1, because he doesn't have any spellcasting, he's not able to regenerate, his items are good, but not as good as the other guys, and the buffs that he provides don't make him very tactical. And the thing is, any like low-level lord that comes into contact with Grimgore, you'll easily be able to kill him with Grimgore, no problem. But that's just not enough. Sometimes you need some special abilities to inflict massive numbers of casualties, or you need to be able to tank a lot, or be able to do something that's just a lot more tactical. And Grimgore just doesn't really have anything like that. So in terms of battle skill, he's getting 9 out of 10, because he doesn't have a mount, he's not particularly fast. You kind of have to just hope that the enemy lord is dumb enough that they'll come at you, which most of the time they are. But unfortunately, killing lords in this game, like lord sniping, is not is not really that valuable because the leadership debuff from killing an enemy lord is only -16 for a short time and then -10. And if you're playing on very hard battle difficulty, all you've done then is negate the battle difficulty leadership penalty. So the enemy will still actually have higher leadership than you even after you've killed that lord. And Grimgore will fare far worse late campaign against other way more powerful lords in the game, like Imric against Tyrion, other legendary lords that be able to dick him around and cast spells or shoot him and all that kind of stuff. Grimgore is going to perform really badly at that stage, and I'm not going to give somebody a high ranking because they're okay at the beginning of the campaign. That's not really good enough. The late campaign can be extremely difficult, and Grimgore is not necessarily the guy that you want commanding your armies during that time. Alright, so the next thing I want to evaluate him is Battle Commander. So I'm going to give him a 7 out of 10. He does boost a really important unit. He boosts Black Orcs, but the boosts that he provides Black Orcs is not that much. Okay, leadership for Black Orc units plus 12, that's pretty good, but Black Orcs already have a lot of leaderships. He does have the Immortals, which is great, really, really great, but that's only applied to one unit, and that doesn't make them immortal at all, and they can still get killed. Unless the battle is already in your favor, the Immortals are not quite as good as they're maybe led to believe. They are good though, but they're not invincible. He does also have Black Orc Wrecking Ball, extra 9 armor piercing damage for Black Orc units. Again, that is pretty good. But I'm not going to give him 10 out of 10 for that because Black Orcs are not the best units in the Greenskin roster. And in fact, you can roll around with armies without any Black Orcs and you'll do just fine. Black Orcs are expensive and they're slow, and that's some of the best melee infantry units in the game when they get into melee, but they can get killed very easily by artillery, from missile units. They can get bogged down very easily. They're just not as good as other units in the Greenskin roster, even with all these buffs. So he's only going to get a 7 out of 10 there, because he doesn't buff anything else really, except for Orc Biggins and Savage Orc Biggins, which they're even less important than Black Orcs, so I'm not going to really give any points at all for that. Alright, so the next thing is faction buffs, and Grimgore is getting a solid 5 out of 10 there, because Grimgore provides nothing. There are no buffs at all to the faction, not one anywhere. So you might think, well, why doesn't he get a 0 out of 10? The way I want to do it is that if you're getting a 5 out of 10, that means you provide nothing. But if you get a 4 out of 10, that means you're actually weakening the faction. So I'm probably going to have to redo my evaluation of Throg, because he doesn't actually weaken the faction. But for example, Sigvold, who makes other lords more expensive, he would actually lose points for that. And we're not doing the Chaos Lord comparison right now, but as an example, he does weaken his faction in some regards, so that would be where points would go down. So if you provide absolutely nothing, you get a 5. So overall, Grimgore is a 9 out of 10 battle skill, 7 out of 10 battle commander, and 5 out of 10 faction buff, which gives him a solid 7 out of 10. Now 7 out of 10 is about the same quality as Karl Franz, which he's kind of reverse with him, because he provides good faction buffs, but Karl Franz is not good in melee. He's just not a good fighter at all, so he would lose a lot of points to that. But we're not doing the Empire Legendary Lord comparison. So there's my rating for Grimgore Ironhide. Unfortunately, even though I'm looking at the non-beta patch version, I know Grimgore's going to get a buff, but I'd still say that even with those buffs, he's probably going to be maybe 7.3. It's just not significant buffs enough, because he's just not a tactical legendary lord. He just doesn't do anything. The other ones are just so much better than him, and that's why he's getting the number 5 spot. Now let's talk about the best guy, the guy who is actually the best, and by a process of elimination, you know who it is. Coming in at number 1 is Wurzag, the Great Green Prophet. So Wurzag is actually the best. So prior to the patch, Wurzag was okay. He was not the worst legendary lord, certainly not the best. But the Greenskin patch gave him such an absurd amount of bonuses that he's just shot right up in the strength rankings. So let's have a look and explain why he is so powerful now. So looking at his skill tree, because that's where it all lies in. Talking about his battle skill first, he's a 10 out of 10. Now, he's obviously not the best melee combatant, but what it comes down to is his spellcasting ability. His spellcasting is absurd, and it all comes down to Foot of Gork. Foot of Gork being one of the best spells that the Greenskins have to offer, basically destroys any type of infantry unit in the game, and there's, loads of infantry that will come at you, especially when you're going up against dwarfs. The base cost, if you've got it fully upgraded, is 15 Winds of Magic. But if you get Titanic Beast, it goes down to 6 Winds of Magic, because it reduced by 9. It kind of weirdly reduces it more for the single casted than the overcasted version, so it's definitely worth it more to single cast it and just do it more often. It's usually when a buff like this is provided, it's the other way around. Like it would be -9 for upgraded, but -6 for regular. So I think that might actually be a typo that might be addressed sometime soon, because that's not unheard of to happen. But even if that was the case, he'd still be a 10 out of 10 Lord, because he could just cast the spell almost 3 times as much as any other wizard, because he'll also get Arcane Conduit and, through Squiggly Beast, a constant Arcane Conduit. So basically a greater Arcane Conduit on top of it. So Wurzag is able to generate a ton of Winds of Magic. He's actually one of the best spellcasters in the game, and that's why he's getting a 10 out of 10 for that. Now, in terms of commanding skills, he's also going to get a 10 out of 10. Now, originally, Wurzag just primarily boosted Savage Orcs, and I'm not the biggest fan of Savage Orcs, but in the early game, they're actually one of the best melee infantry units in the game, because you get them at like tier 1, and he's able to reduce their upkeep cost by 50%, give them extra physical resistance, and boost their melee attack throughout the skill tree here. Now the thing is with Wurzag is that once you're done with using Savage Orcs, because they'll only be useful for a certain amount of time, once you get to the late campaign, you get Colossal Warpaint, and then you've got physical resistance for Trolls, Giants, Arachnarok Spiders, and Rogue Idols. Now, I don't really care that much about Trolls and Giants, but Arachnarok Spiders and Rogue Idols are really good. And 20% physical resistance basically is just going to make them a hell of a lot tougher. And that is a massive bonus. And then on top of that, he gets physical resistance for the entire army. So it's actually 25% physical resistance. So it's absolutely massive. And that's why he's primarily getting the 10 out of 10, because Wurzag is able to boost his army throughout the entire campaign. He's good in the early game, good in the mid game, good in the late game. He boosts nearly every unit in the entire roster because of the physical resistance. So basically, if you want to take out Wurzag's army, you need a lot of magic attack. Now, another thing on top of that is that he gets Fury the Prophet. Now, this used to be crap because it would apply magic attack to all of your army, and the first enemy that you would go up against is dwarves, and dwarves are resistant to magic, so you're actually making your army weaker until you've gotten rid of the dwarves, that is. But because he now strips enemies of any magic resistance, you can actually make the dwarves weaker against magic, which will then tie into this spell here, so Foot of Gork will also do even more damage to dwarves. Again, why he's getting 10 out of 10 for Battle Combatant and for Commander. Now talking about his faction buffs, he's just going to get a 7 out of 10. So no 10 out of 10 for him here. Doesn't provide much, but through Squiggly Beast, he's able to increase the capacity of Shamans and increase their hero recruit rank by 5, which is very similar to what Azag does, but Azag only gives 4 levels. I'm still going to give them both the same ranking because they essentially do the same thing, even though Wurzag's one is slightly better, so you could kind of consider Wurzag to be like 7.1 out of 10, but I just sort of rounded down anyway. He's got enough points at this point. So overall, Wurzag is a 9 out of 10 Legendary Lord, which is a really good ranking. There are not that many 9 out of 10 Legendary Lords in the game, and there's even fewer 10 out of 10 Legendary Lords. So that is why I think that Wurzag is the best Legendary Lord for the Greenskins in the game currently. I do think he'll get a nerf sometime soon, but I kind of hope he won't. We'll just have to see. Anyway, that's my list. There's a lot of things to explain in that, and I hope I was able to coherently explain it, because some of it is quite complicated. But if you don't agree with some of the decisions, then feel free to leave a comment down below and explain why, because in the past you guys have actually convinced me that I was wrong about something. A case in point, the Bloated Corpses as being the worst unit for the Vampire Coast. I no longer believe that. I was wrong about Bloated Corpses. So it is possible to convince me otherwise. But I'm pretty sure that Wurzag is going to stay at number 1, and I'm pretty sure that Grimgore is going to stay at number 5. Anyway, that's the end of this one. Don't forget to subscribe if you've enjoyed the video. I would like to do more of these kind of Legendary Lord comparisons with other races, and we're quickly approaching 300,000 subscribers, and at 300,000 subscribers, I want to do a 24-hour long stream and donate the proceeds to a charity, which we're still trying to work out the details for that. So that should be happening fairly soon. But if you're enjoying the content, give us a sub, and I'll see you next time, fuckers.